What's up, YouTube? I'm here to do my prediction video for UFC Fight Night Whittaker versus Till. Let's start at the bottom. The first fight is Nathaniel Wood versus John. I can't say this guy's last name. John looks like he's a decent new guy to the UFC. His record 17-4. He's got a good mix of striking, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. I just think Nathaniel Wood has the exact same good mix of striking, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. He's just a little bit better at all three. And because of that, I just think Nathaniel Wood's going to win by finish sooner or later. I think it's going to be in the first or second round. And like I said, it's mainly just because I feel like they're the same. I just think Nathaniel Wood's better at all three. So I'm going with Nathaniel Wood to win by finish. Next is Rosamond Eve versus Nicholas. I can't say his last name. Nicholas is this German guy. He looks like he's another solid guy who's good everywhere, but I would say his biggest weakness is, a lot of European guys' biggest weakness is that he's not the greatest wrestler overall, and I think Rosamond Eve is a really good wrestler. I just see Rosamond controlling this fight with the wrestling all three rounds and winning a 30-27 decision. Not much to say about it other than that. Next is Bethe Correia versus Piana Kinzard. This is really tough because these are both striker chicks. Neither one of them is the greatest grappler. I guess Piana is probably a little bit better of a wrestler. I think Bethe is a little bit better of a striker. It's really close. I think whoever can kind of control it in the clinch against the fence is going to edge out the rounds. And I'm leaning towards Piana, but I could see it going the exact opposite way. This is one of the toughest fight to calls, just because, like I said, I really feel like whoever's going to be able to outmuscle the other one in the clinch against the fence is going to take the rounds. And whoever wins round one is probably going to win all three rounds, but I'm leaning towards Piana. Next is Tanner Boser versus Rafael Poza, and this is basically two really good strikers going at it. I think Rafael is the more heavy hitter, but I think Tanner Boser's just got the much better movement and overall variety of strikes. I feel like Rafael is primarily like a kick puncher, and so is Boser, but I just feel like he's a lot faster and he uses a lot more movement. I don't think these guys are going to knock each other out. I just think Boser is going to be able to just slightly edge out the rounds with his better movement and a little bit slightly better speed, and because of that, I think he's going to win by a decision. Next is Muzavar Evelon versus Mike Grundy, and this is two really good wrestlers going at it. I think Mike Grundy's got okay boxing. It's mainly his power that's the biggest thing. I think Muzavar is actually a good striker. He's a better grappler. I wouldn't say he's the better wrestler. Mike Grundy's definitely the better wrestler. But I don't think it's going to matter. I think in terms of overall wrestling, these guys are close enough to where I don't think it's going to be on the ground that much. I think it's going to be a striking fight the whole time it lasts. And I just feel like Muzavar is the much more technical striker. I think he's got the better, overall technique and volume. I think Mike Grundy, like I said, he has more punching power, but I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think he's going to be able to land any super big shots on Muzavar. I think Muzavar is just going to be able to dance around him and, outpoint him for 3 rounds or get a TKO if Grundy starts to kind of fade. So like I said, I think Muzavar is just going to keep it on the feet, outpoint him, and either win by decision or like a late 3rd round TKO. Next is Tom, I can't say his last name, versus Jake Collier. And Jake Collier's been out for a while, but he's still pretty young. He's only like 30 years old. His record in the UFC was kind of up and down. I think he was like 4-3. He's been out for a while. He's been injured for a while, and you never know how someone's going to look when they come back from that. And I'm not saying Jake Collier is like the greatest fighter ever, but I do think he has a huge wrestling advantage going into this fight. And it's like, unless his injury has just destroyed him, I feel like the wrestling advantage he has in this fight is so massive that it's like, Tom, to me, just feels like he's an okay fighter who's only been fighting okay people at best. More often than not, I think he's fighting below average people, in all honesty, when I looked at his record. I just think that if Jake can get this to the ground, he's going to win, and that's just what I see happening. Unless Jake is just completely shot after that injury that kept him out for like 2 years, I think he's going to push Tom against the fence, eventually take him down, and win by either TKO or submission. Next is Nicholas Dalby versus Jesse Ronson. And Jesse's a really good fighter. He's got really good striking. He's got solid takedown defense and good defense on the ground. His biggest problem is he has a hard time getting up once he gets taken down. Like, he has good defense, but he kind of gets trapped on the ground when he's fighting bigger guys. And this is just a fact. He's a lightweight. You know what I mean? He's fought at 70 before, but he's a lightweight. And Nicholas Dalby has great conditioning and great wrestling. This is what's just going to happen. I mean, he's just going to continuously take him down and hold him down. Like, Nicholas Dalby can do that easy for 3 rounds. His conditioning and his wrestling are super on point. You know, the way people beat Dalby is just outstriking him. His striking's okay, but the great strikers with good takedown defense can beat up Dalby. I think Reese has the great striking, but he doesn't have the size or the wrestling to keep Dalby off him, and I think Dalby's just going to win all 3 rounds pretty clearly, 30-27. Next is Francisco Trinaldo versus Jai Herbert, and Jai Herbert is a solid striker. He's a solid up-and-comer. I just think Trinaldo's, you know, in terms of overall striking, it's probably close. In terms of punching power, Jai might have a slight advantage. I just think one of the biggest things is Trinaldo's got a huge advantage in the wrestling, and I think in terms of the overall experience, he's just fought the higher level of competition. I mean, Jai can catch him. He is a great striker. You know what I mean? He's 10-1, and I think 9 of his 10 wins have come by knockout. I just think that Trinaldo's just a little too high level for this random guy making his debut. I think worst case scenario, Trinaldo can probably take him down and submit him. Like, he has a black belt and good wrestling. And I haven't seen Jai really fight any super major good grapplers. And most of the clips I see on these random guys outside the UFC is just their knockout highlights. It's hard to find good actual fights. I saw the one where he got knocked out, but that's about it. Either way, I think that Trinaldo's just going to either slightly edge him out on the feet or use his grappling to edge out the rounds and maybe even win by submission. But either way, I got Trinaldo. On to the main card. The first fight is Kazmat. Can't say his last name, versus Reyes McKee. And Reyes McKee fought Jai Herbert. He has a KO win over him. He's, you know, his record's like 11-2 or 10-2. I just think he's going to get out-grappled. I think it's the same thing that's going to happen in Kazmat's last fight that just happened 2 weeks ago. I think that Kazmat, you know, I didn't really know who he was. I thought he was a striker. No, he's this really good wrestler. And it's like, I saw his wrestling. I don't think Reyes has the wrestling to keep up with him. I think Kazmat's going to take this to the ground just like he did in his last fight and just control the shit out of this guy until he finishes him with a choke. And that's just what I see. So I got Kazmat winning by either round 1 or round 2 submission with like a rear naked choke or arm triangle. Next, we got Alex Oliveira versus Peter Sobotta. And to me, Sobotta can definitely win this fight. I think if he can get Oliveira to the ground and just stay on top of him, he can edge it out. But I just feel like in terms of striking and just activity, I think I have to go with Oliveira. You know, Sobotta's older than Oliveira by a few years. He isn't fighting as actively. And I just feel like Oliveira, you know, he's still fighting top-level guys. Sobotta, I feel like, is a top-level guy, but he's super inactive, and I think Sobotta's pretty much close to the end. As for Oliveira, like I said, his striking's definitely way better. On the ground, it's pretty close. So Peter's probably a little bit better if he's on top. But if Oliveira is on top, it's pretty close. Like I said, I don't know if he'll even hit the ground. And like I said, I think Peter's inactivity just worries me, so I'm going with Alex to win by knockout probably in the second round. Next is Paul Craig versus Gazimir. I can't say his last name. And this is 2 really good grapplers with some striking and some wrestling going at it. It's really tough because I feel like in the first round, Gazad can beat most people. I think if he's on top, he's got really good submissions. And I think Paul Craig will welcome that ground battle, and that's where it's going to get dicey because it's like, if Gazimard can take him down, then it's like he can go either way. Because on top, I feel like Gazimard's a really good grappler, and Paul Craig's a better grappler on the bottom when he fights most people. I don't know how good he's going to look against Gazimard. So it's kind of just who catches who first, because I do think this fight's going to hit the ground pretty quick and fast. I'm leaning towards Craig, just because if it is on the feet, I do think he's the better striker. And I feel like, you know, in terms of the long fight, Craig is way better. Craig has better conditioning than Gazimard, and if this doesn't end in the first round, he will finish him in the second or the third. I think Gazimard's only chance of winning is to get a first-round sub, and Craig can win pretty much at any point in time in this fight, other than the first. So I just have to go with the more likely scenario of if it doesn't end in the first round, then Craig's going to win by knockout or submission. Next, we got Carla Esparza versus Mariana Rodriguez, and this is just going to depend on if Carla can get the wrestling off. If Carla can mix in her takedowns and stay on top of Maria, you know, when she needs to, she'll get a decision win. If she can't, and it's just on the feet, Mariana's just going to, you know, outpoint her and outstrike her for 3 rounds. It's tough because I feel like Carla Esparza has been looking really good. I think Mariana's the better up-and-comer, but it's kind of like experience versus youth, and it's just who you think's going to win. I'm leaning towards Esparza. I think she will hit the takedowns when she needs to. I think it's going to be a really close fight, just like Esparza's last fight with Watterson. But I think she's going to edge out a really close split decision. Next is Fabricio Verdun versus Alexander Gustafsson, and I just feel like Gustafsson's got too much of a speed and overall strength advantage. I don't think this fight's going to hit the mat, and I think if it's just pure kickboxing, I think Gustafsson's got a big advantage. Verdun's never been a great wrestler, You know, and at heavyweight, that doesn't really matter. But when you're fighting a guy who's super athletic like Gustafsson, who's basically a light heavyweight, even at heavyweight, you know, it does matter. Because it's like you're not just going to force these fights to the ground like you will against some heavyweights where, you know what I mean, great takedown offense doesn't matter as much. Against Gustafsson, I don't see him pulling this to the ground. And I think if they're just straight kickboxing, I do think Gustafsson is just the way better kickboxer, especially at this point in their careers. Like, Verdun didn't look amazing his last fight. He was getting outstruck by, you know, Oleinik, and I feel like Gustafsson can absolutely do the exact same thing. And I just think Gustafsson's going to win by either decision or knockout or TKO late. Next, we got Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Antonio Nogueira, and I think that this fight's going to be a decent fight. I think both these guys are getting up there. I think, you know, Nogueira said this is his last fight, and Shogun said he's going to fight like 2 or 3 more times after this. I give the edge to Shogun, just like in their first 2 fights. I think in terms of wrestling, he's got the advantage, and in terms of overall striking, he has a slight advantage. I think Nogueira, you know, is a really patient fighter. He waits for that big counter shot, and if he doesn't land it, then people kind of just outpoint him a lot of the time. And like I said, I think that if Shogun needs to go for takedowns, he can. Um, like I said, both these guys are getting up there. I'm glad both of them are retiring soon. They're both obviously close towards the end of their career. I don't think this will be as good as their first 2 fights, but I do think Shogun's going to win at least a 29-28 decision. Finally, we have Robert Whittaker versus Darren Till, and I just feel like both these guys didn't look great in their last fights. Like, even though that Till won against Calvin Gastelum, he just didn't look super amazing. As with Robert Whittaker, you know, he just looked super ineffective against Israel, and you know, it's hard to tell with both these guys. Is it like have they taken too much damage too recently? Are they starting to decline, or were they just bad performances and this fight will be better? It's hard to tell. I'd say both of these guys are, in terms of their grappling, they're both really good at stuffing takedowns and getting back up. So I really don't think it's going to be a grappling match. I think it's going to be a straight kickboxing match. I think in terms of overall technique, I give a slight edge to Darren Till, but in terms of speed and knockout power, I give the edge to Whittaker. I also think Whittaker's the more natural middleweight. I think he's the more denser guy. Like, Till's a little bit bigger. But I think Whittaker's just, like I said, he's denser, and because he's not quite as big as Till, he has that speed advantage, and he has more natural one-punch knockout power, in my opinion. It's really tough because, like I said, I do think Till technically is slightly better. And it's just kind of like, I just don't know how good either of these guys are after their last performances. And I want to see, you know, this is the fight where we're gonna see if how good these guys are and if they can actually still fight for the belt. I am leaning towards Whittaker just because I prefer his speed and power. I think that if they're both fighting like how they did in their last fights, then it's just gonna be this slow point fighting match where Whittaker eventually gets the knockout. Like I said, I'm hoping it's a better, faster pacer fight where it's really back and forth and both guys look really good. But like I said, either way, I am leaning towards Whittaker. I think he's got the speed and power advantage, and I think he's going to win by knockout in probably one of the later rounds, like the 3rd or the 4th. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe.